Hello, Dr. Ron England here, and you finally made it to part 3 of model-based development with MVC. And this is where it's going to kind of all come together. You've probably already figured it out if you watched 1 and 2. We're going to talk about the views now. And when you created this, it created some views. Or when you created the project that I did and created the model that I created in the controllers, it did make the views. And we're going to start with those views. So first, let's go over here to my Solution Explorer, and you can see that it made this directory called User Data Entries, and it's got these files in it. The files should look kind of familiar: create, delete, details, edit, and index. If you recall, those are the different views that you have for this data model. Now, let's first look at the index, which is the one that's here on the screen. And you can see that you have this at model, IEnumerable, user data entries. Well, what's actually coming to this is a list. And you can actually know this if you go back to the controller, and you can see that it's a list that gets passed, a list of user data entries that gets passed into the view. And I'm not going to go into the details of all the HTML helper class capabilities, but HTML helper makes it really easy to put HTML on your page. Now, this index, let's say we're looking now at the index one. And it's probably easier if I just show you what index looks like, because I've created a few of them, so I can run this in Firefox. And let me bring Firefox down here so you can see it. And I can go ahead and reduce down the glimpse a bit. And you can see that I've got an index. I've got a create new button. I've got a grid with 4 different data entries and the edit, details, delete. And if you come over here to the view, you should see that that actually kind of makes sense. You've got a title, which is index, you've got this HTML action link, create new. Well, there it is. That is an action link, so there's something there that goes with that action link. We're not going to talk about what these are now. And then display name for, those are in a table. It's, and you should, by the way, you really do have to know good old HTML to know this, but you can see there's a table row, and you've got this for each, which looks like C# code with some table stuff in it. So that kind of makes sense. And then you've got this table cell here that's got the 3 buttons that you saw in that. So wow, I mean, this looks a lot like HTML, so you should be very, very familiar to you, but it's got these well, if you remember good old ASP and you remember the how you brought up C# code inside of your HTML and C in there, well, this is just a simpler syntax, at. And the HTML is simply an instance of an HTML helper, and it's got a bunch of methods to help you just pop up HTML on the screen, and this is all server-side code. Server-side code. What goes to the browser, what the user sees, is not this. So if I were to come over here to here and look at this and say, you know what, let's view source, you're just going to see plain old HTML source code. There it is, table, okay, all those tables, the table header, the table cells, and it looks just like a table in the HTML. So this was generated, this table and that source was generated from this in here. And if you look at it, it kind of makes sense. Now, one thing that's important to note is I could have done add HTML display for, if I just put the item ID, because the item is actually, it just enumerates through the model. And if you know that the model was a list of user data entries, remember all that stuff that we did before. If I were just to put item ID there, it would just have passed over the item. By using this syntax, I actually get the entire property. And the property has attributes. So it's kind of useful for you to have this in the syntax to get these display items up. Now, we can go a little step further here. This isn't the one that's really interesting to me. Really, I'm going to look at more at the create.ca, the create one. And I made some changes. Now, you should have done this. You should have run this code. You should have it. This one is a form. So I have a begin form. I've got the anti-forgery token. Not going to talk about that now. And then, and let's look at that create. Let's just do create new. And you'll see, here it is. Here's the form. Okay, name, address, phone, email. And if you come over here and look at this, there's a validation summary. Not going to talk about that, but you have a label, an editor, and a validation message. Then here, I replaced the code that uses the HTML helper with hard-coded, plain old HTML to show you that you can do that. And then the other ones I didn't change. And at the end, I actually closed this out. I have an action link. I got some scripts. But this can be pure HTML. It really can. Now, the beauty is that it's bound now. Bound, so that, and I'll show you that binding because we're going to actually do some testing here. But so now you can see that, oh, I've got this. I've done this in hard-coded HTML. The most important thing I have here is an input box with an ID of address and name of address. And if I come over here, I can put a name. I'll do Jane Doe. I already did John Doe. I'll go Jane Doe. She lives at 1313 Mockingbird Lane. You know, if you see that reference. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. And then the email will just say jane.doe@gmail.com. And it, whoops, I'm having a little bit of lag on this. There it goes. And I hit create, and it comes back, and it actually gets added to the index. So it did get into the database because it couldn't have gotten to that index without that. So you know that this code that I wrote in here actually worked. Well, if you look at the generated code of the create, you can actually get an eye. And I used the same class. This is just CSS classes. I used the same classes as it would have used with this because I actually have these HTML attributes in the HTML helper where I set the CSS classes so that it looks nice and pretty. But I could have made this whatever I wanted to do. As long as I had an input with an ID and a name of address, it would have worked. Okay, and the reason for that's simple. Now let's just do one little experiment here, and it can kind of show you how this actually occurred. You know that all this actually happened at the controller level, and if we go back to the controller level, and I'm going to do this with the edit because it's easy to show with the edit, and we're going to go ahead and edit one. I'm going to go ahead and put a breakpoint right here. I'm going to debug. Toggle breakpoint. I'm not going to do it with an F9 because it turns off my recorder. And I'm going to come over here to the model, this one, which by the way is another at edit. Okay, so you have edit, and then you have an overridden method edit here. Okay, those are both methods called edit that take different inputs. Get that? They're both methods named edit, but the past values are different. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and put a breakpoint here. Okay, toggle breakpoint. Now, I'm going to come back over here and I'm going to go ahead and let's just take one of these things and edit it. Well, notice it popped off at the breakpoint. In the first edit, popped off at this breakpoint, I know that that method in my controller got run when I clicked on the edit. So one of the reasons why I'm not going to delve into a tremendous amount of detail of all the steps involved with how this all works is because you can do it yourself. You can throw in breakpoints and see what's happening. Now, I'm going to go ahead and continue here, and that's going to go back, and now I'm going to actually see this edit screen right here. So I continued, and there it is, and now I'm going to click Save. It goes to the other breakpoint, but notice this breakpoint is in the other method named Edit. And you see those bound fields? Important. Names matter. It's got to know that the name matches the name. And if I continue on, it's going to look at that. It's going to see the entry. It's going to check to see if it's modified. Okay, and then redirect back to index. And again, I can go ahead and do the continue. And I'm back where I started. So I'm not going to delve any more than that into the views because you're going to learn views by looking at code and building views. We've hit the architecture though. You've seen how to create a model. You've seen how a controller controls what's going back and forth, and you see that a view is nothing more than a fancy HTML page that allows you to put in server-side code that can be based, that can use the model that is involved there to pass data back and forth to the controller, and the controller can then turn around and pass that data back and forth to a database, to a file, or to something else. All the pieces are now in place for you to build applications. What we're going to do from here, this is the big overview. These 3 lectures should get you a good understanding of what is the basics of MVC. From here on out, what we're going to do is we're going to look at, well, what are all these neat little HTML helpers? How can I make this do really cool stuff? Because if you're coming out of COP 4813 Web Systems 1, you know how to write really good at HTML. If you can write really good HTML, you can build a view. If you understand how a controller can go back and forth between a model, you can interact with the server, and everything is in place for you to create incredibly rich server-side applications, and that's what we're going to move on to. So hopefully this was enough for you to get a good understanding of how all the pieces fit together. We're ready to move on and make things happen. So good coding, and looking forward to some of these upcoming lectures.